Cedar Fair, as we know it, is dead. Kind of. The company no longer exists, merging with Six Flags in 2024, adopting the Six Flags name. But the company is being run by Cedar Fair CEO, so at least in spirit, the company lives on. It got started, for all intents and purposes, back in 1870, the opening of Cedar Point in Sandusky, Ohio, but it became an official chain in 1978 when Cedar Point acquired Valley Fair, and from there, they've been in charge of 14 theme parks, 11 still under their purview. Up until the merger, they've added a grand total of 84 coasters, and these are their favorite manufacturers. Just a few disclaimers. I'm only looking at coasters added while Cedar Fair was in charge. If it was added to the park before they took over, or after they left, I'm not including that on this list. I am including new for 2025 coasters. I think those are already in the works going back before the merger. Finally, I am not including relocated coasters. I don't think those are a good indicator of how a company works with a manufacturer. Usually, those come about by happenstance, an opportunity they take advantage of. So, only new coasters will be on the list. Unlike Six Flags that only goes back to 1961, Cedar Fair goes back over 150 years, and some of these coasters don't have official manufacturers, or they just aren't known. Of course, they're all at Cedar Point, starting with Switchback Railway in 1892, having a 10-year run, not having a lift chain so the cars had to be pulled back by hand after each cycle. Loop-de-Loop arrived right after Scenic Railway left, a 2,500-foot wood coaster that actually didn't have a loop. It seems like the loop it's referencing is a figure-8 layout. Right before Loop-de-Loop took off, Dip the Dip Scenic Railway came along in 1908, a wooden coaster that lasted 10 seasons, and that sported 4,200 feet of track. Very impressive. Cyclone was built in 1929, having a very good run till 1951, being sold off. And then, finally, in 1962, they got Scamper, a wooden wild mouse, being removed in 1969. If you haven't figured it out by now, Cedar Point has a lot of old coasters, but that was only the coasters with unknown manufacturers. They have a bunch of other old ones that do have a manufacturer listed. 10 manufacturers have only worked with Cedar Fair once, and a bunch of these are super old school. McKay Construction building Racer at Cedar Point in 1910, a pair of 46-foot tall wooden coasters that lasted till 1928. The T.M. Hart & Company built Leap the Dips. No, not that one, the one at Cedar Point from 1912 to 1935, designed by Irwin Vettel. Meanwhile, Edward A. Vettel designed Cedar Point's Leapfrog Railway, later renamed High Frolics, 75 feet tall, opening in 1918, closing in 1940. Okay, one more weird Cedar Point one-off, I promise. B.A. Sheff & Associates built Wild Mouse in 1959, closed in 1963. I do need to come back to Cedar Point, but I'm getting sick of them, so let's go somewhere else. Let's go super modern and point out that Cedar Fair only worked with Premier rides once and is coming this year, Alpenfury at Canada's Wonderland. Six Flags went to premiere 9 times. It almost seems impossible Cedar Fair avoided them for all these years. Speaking of avoiding a company for a long time, Cedar Fair never worked with S&S until 2022, buying Tim Beeley for King's Dominion. Six Flags work with S&S a lot more, but in fairness, most of their S&S coasters are also free spins, and they just bought a ton of them. Maurer only also has one Cedar Fair coaster, that coming back in 2000 when Dorney Park would get new coasters more often than every 20 years. They got this Wild Mouse. Cedar Fair only has one Zero project, and even if you're a big coaster fan, you might be wondering what the heck this coaster could be. If you had Pepsi Ripsaw at Knott's Camp Snoopy in your bingo card, you're a big winner. Cedar Fair operated this park from its inception in 1992 all the way to 2005, and this Zero Tivoli is a park original, winding around the entire park and still operating to this day as Pepsi Orange Streak. That was fun, but let's go back to Cedar Point for 2 more wooden coasters, and this time I promise it's more modern. PTC built a ton of wooden coasters but stopped in 1976, so Cedar Fair only had Cedar Point available to get one, and in 1964 they did, Blue Streak. The 78-foot tall, 2,500-foot out-and-back wooden coaster, still giving fantastic rides at the front of the park. 27 years later, Cedar Point would build a coaster that would be hard to imagine back in 1964. The Dinn Corporation's Mean Streak, 161 feet tall and over a mile long. Dinn wasn't around too long, and this was their only Cedar Fair coaster. Staying at Cedar Point, we have our first manufacturer with 2 coasters, the Allen Herschel Company. They were known for their Wild Mouse and kids coasters, and Cedar Point had 2 kids coasters. Little Dipper only lasted a year in 1952, and Super Coaster replaced it in 1953, closing in 1964. Getting back to some normal manufacturers, there are 6 that have 3 coasters in the chain. One of them, unfortunately, is RMC, and they all came back in the same year, 2018. We just talked about Mean Streak. That became Steel Vengeance, a coaster designed to be the best in the world, and a lot of people would agree. They also transformed Hurler at King's Dominion, a relic from the Paramount days, creating the airtime pack Twisted Timbers, and jumped on the chance to add the brand new RMC model, the Raptor, getting one for Great America. More old school, Cedar Fair got 3 Schwarzkopf coasters, and given they stopped making coasters in the mid-80s, yeah, these are all at Cedar Point. 2 of them are Wildcats, actually named Wildcat, the first one coming in 1970 and being moved to Valley Fair in 1979, a new one coming in right behind it and lasting till 2011. Then, from 1972 to 1978, they had a typical jumbo jet named Jumbo Jet. Vekoma also has 3, only one coming to Cedar Point, Woodstock Express, and I don't count Siren's Curse just because that was passed around a few times. I don't consider that Cedar Fair working with Vekoma. Down the state of Ohio, Kings Island just got their first Cedar Fair Vekoma, the family boomerang, Snoopy Soapbox Racers. We saw Six Flags use Vekoma 32 times, loading their parks with SLCs and boomerangs, and only one park was unfortunate to get one of these from Cedar Fair, Boomerang at Worlds of Fun. Hard to believe, with that enormous SLC and boomerang revolution, Cedar Fair only went to that well once. Gerstlauer has an interesting path with Cedar Fair, getting 2 in 2004, both spinners, one at Worlds of Fun, and another at, here it is again, Knott's Camp Snoopy, opening as Timberland Twister and now known as Fairly Odd Coaster. But then, Cedar Fair took 14 years off from Gerstlauer, only to hire them to build Knott's first thrill coaster in, again, 14 years, the Infinity Coaster, Hang Time. Morgan has 3 coasters in the Cedar Fair chain, tripling that of Six Flags, and Cedar Fair used Morgan to fill their smaller parks with hypers in back-to-back-to-back years. Wild Thing at Valley Fair, then Steel Force at Dorney Park, and then Mamba at Worlds of Fun. From 1996 to 1998, these 200-foot, mile-long coasters dominated the park skylines. Last one with 3, one of the newest manufacturers, Art Engineering. They got in on the game early, the shooting dark ride coaster Winter Mountain's Guardian at Canada's Wonderland in 2014, and came back for a pair of family launch coasters, Snoopy's Racing Railway at the same park in 2023, and at Carowinds this year. There is one manufacturer with 4, and that's Mack Rides. I was lamenting that Six Flags didn't have any awesome new age Machs in their catalog, but Cedar Fair does have one, the multi-launch Copperhead Strike at Carowinds. Aside from that, you have to go back a number of years and find 2 coasters at Knott's Berry Farm, the Wild Mouse Coast Rider and the family spinner Sierra Sidewinder. That 4th Mach coaster is not as memorable, only being at Cedar Point for the 1964 season, Broadway Trip. One manufacturer has worked with Cedar Fair 5 times, and let's talk about the wooden coaster manufacturer GCI. You won't find any CCIs on here, or gravity groups, but Cedar Fair has enjoyed the work of GCI since 2007. Yes, they kinda got in late in the game, over a decade after GCI got started, but they got a great one in Renegade at Valley Fair. Sadly, still the last major coaster they've given one of their original parks. They followed up 2 years later with Prowler at Worlds of Fun. And speaking of Worlds of Fun, they got another GCI for some reason in 2023, Zambezi Zinger. Finally, they got 2 great ones in the meantime, Gold Striker being the first great addition they got for Great America, and Mystic Timbers at Kings Island, supposed to be a nice holdover until they got their Giga, but lo and behold, and maybe the best ride in the park. The one manufacturer with 6 coasters is kind of a sore subject, Zamperla. We all know about Top Thrill 2 at Cedar Point, but you may forget the coaster they got the year prior is also Zamperla, Wild Mouse. That ended a 15-year Zamperla drought, having to go back to 2008 to find Pony Express at Knott's. And then 2 kids coasters, Woodstock Express at Dorney Park being their gravity model, and one more coaster from Knott's Camp Snoopy, back at the Barnyard Hayride in 1995. We have a tie for a very distant second place, and these manufacturers having 8 coasters apiece. Let's start with the Elder Statesman, Aerodynamics. These span from 1969 to 1999. 5 of these 8 went to Cedar Point. The first, of course, was Cedar Creek Mine Ride, and then they started using Aero to break records. The world's first triple inverting coaster, Corkscrew. The tallest coaster in the world when that opened, the dual-track Gemini, taking it down a notch with Iron Dragon. Then, ramping it back up with the world's first full-circuit coaster over 200 feet, Magnum XL 200. As for the other 3, you may be surprised they all came to the same park, that being Valley Fair. Corkscrew in 1980, Excalibur in 1989, and the final Aero coaster, Mad Mouse in 1999. As Aero was dying, Intamin was thriving, and Cedar Fair went hard with Intamin between 2000 and 2010. But their work with Intamin goes back to 1979, the place where Intamin got their start, Junior Gemini, aka Wilderness Run at Cedar Point, following that up with Avalanche Run, aka Disaster Transport in 1985. And then in 2000, they got serious with Intamin, Millennium Force being the first full-circuit 300-foot coaster, Wicked Twister being the first 200-foot impulse, Top Thrill Dragster being the tallest and fastest coaster in the world, period. And then, one of the most revered coasters in the world, Maverick in 2007. Again, 5 of the 8 went to Cedar Point. Knott's got a piece of that action in 2002, the intense launch coaster Accelerator. Valley Fair getting in on the Impulse Fun, Steel Venom, and their final coaster was no surprise, Intimidator 305 at King's Dominion. That needing lots of tweaks and retracking and never gaining popularity with the public. The ride just being too freaking intense. Cedar Fair was given a lot of reasons to stay away from Intamin, so it's no shock their run with them ended in 2010. And finally, the winner of the Cedar Fair Gauntlet, clearing the field by a full 10 coasters, B&M. 18 across the chain, starting with Raptor at Cedar Point in 1994, the first of 5 inverts across the chain. Surprisingly, the other 4 came after the year 2000. One Six Flags is pretty much done with them. Talon, Silver Bullet, Patriot, Banshee. 2 of those 4 come into their so-called lower tier parks. Cedar Fair's second B&M was also the only stand-up they ever bought, Mantis at Cedar Point. Also, bought only 1 floorless, that being Hydra at Dorney Park. Then, 3 hypers in back-to-back-to-back years, all coming to the newly acquired Paramount parks. Behemoth in 2008, Diamondback in 2009, Intimidator in 2010. They followed that up with 3 Gigas, starting with Leviathan in 2012, Fury 325 in 2015, and Orion in 2020. Got in on the wing game in 2013 with Gatekeeper, finally getting that second one this year in Rapterra. And that just leaves dive coasters. You got 3 of those, all weirdly orange. Valraven in 2016, Yukon Striker in 2019, and Iron Menace in 2024. Cedar Fair has been a consistent customer of B&M, never getting more than 1 per year, but never going more than a few years without adding one. That's a wrap on Cedar Fair's favorite manufacturers. Let me know if anything here stands out to you, and if you have any other thoughts, sound off in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please drop a like, and if you're new here and love coasters, please give me a sub. I want to thank my Patreons. If you want bonus access, bonus content, and have your name listed at the end of each video, check my links below and join. Also, check out my second channel where I post copyright-free off-ride footage. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.